Okay. By the way, the games we've looked at till now, they are called deterministic because we have not yet introduced randomness, and they're called games with perfect information. Please remember that. They are very nice, simple, extensive games. I'm going to now introduce randomness, so then I'm now going to be not necessarily deterministic, and I'm also going to introduce imperfect information later. So randomness. So to accommodate for randomness, we need just to allow nature nodes. There is one more player which plays at all their nodes where we need to introduce randomization. So the P, the function which tells us who plays at a given node V, I need to write V minus L. One second. So P goes to N and to N united with the empty set. And that means basically that it can say that, let's say, some of the players play, or it can say now it's the turn of the nature to play, and the nature here choose one of the children of this node with a given, with the definition of the game, probability distribution. So every node of nature is endowed with a commonly known, so everyone knows that distribution, and everyone knows that everyone knows that distribution, and so on. It's a commonly known probability distribution. So for example, you know that this branch is taken with a probability of 1/3, and the other one, let's say 2 branches, is taken with the probability of 2/3. Now, then a strategy profile is given. Of course, the strategy profile is not for nature. The nature, according to the definition of the game, there is no strategy which the nature chooses. And the strategy profile is given for players. I mean, it, however, given this given distribution of the nature, introduce the distribution on the path, and then the utility is given as the expected utility. So for example, there can be one path with probability half and the other path with probability half. Okay, so it's half times the utility of that player in one path plus half times the utility of the other, of the utility of that player, if the other path is chosen. So formally it's the Lebesgue integral measured by this distribution, or in the case of in the countable case, when things converge, you just can say it's a sum of the utilities of this path weighted by the probability of the path. So it's a natural extension of the definition, and let us look at an example. It's relevant, unfortunately, to our current situation. That's an example of a pandemic. So in the beginning, the nature decides whether there will be pandemic, or nature, whatever. There is a mechanism which, in the abstraction level of this model, this probability of 0.9, there is no pandemic. And then both guys here meet and do some common work, which they do, whatever. I don't know, they meet to dance, for example, maybe. It's a guy and a girl, whatever. 1 and 2 are the players, so they meet to dance, they both enjoy it to the extent of 2. No, and nobody gets to act after nature. Now, if the nature has acted to choose the pandemic with the probability of 0.1, then the first guy, let's say that that's the active one, decides whether to go to dances or not. So if he stays home, they both don't enjoy the dances, so instead of having 2-2 as they used to have, they now have 0-0. But they don't catch the virus because it's dangerous to go up to the dancing club, but they don't catch the virus. Now, if he decides to go, then the second guy, or let's say the girl, decides whether she joins him. If she decides to stay, then she will definitely be healthy. And the only question will be whether the player 1, will get something, because he did enter the room where people dance. So, this probability 0.45, that's an example. He gets something and he gets -20, and the girl gets 0, because she doesn't dance but she doesn't get sick. And this is the probability of 0.55, that the guy does not contract any virus. So he simply goes to that place, doesn't dance because his partner hasn't come, but doesn't catch any virus, so they both again get 0-0. Now if the girl has chosen to go, they now both enjoy the dances, so they always have this enjoyment of 2 from the dances. Now the question is whether they are going to be ill, and if yes, who? So we can talk about this the relevant dependencies between one getting ill and the other getting ill, but we are not going to count it now. Just some probability which represents whatever health situation they have, however close the dance, and the probabilities are like that. This probability 0.4, I'm going from left to right. They both get the virus, so they both get -20, which is the, let's say, common, whatever both of them get if they get sick. But they got also 2 for enjoying the dances, so it's -20 plus 2, it's -18. Of course, it does not really have to be like a simple sum, but in this case, it's just -18 everyone. It's probability 0.3. The first player does not get the virus, so the first player enjoys the dancing, and he doesn't get the virus, so he gets 2. The second player does get the virus, so she gets -20 plus 2. That's just an explanation, but plus 2 for dancing, but eventually the important part in the model, we don't say how, we just say that the number is -18. It's probably 0.2. The opposite happens, so the first player gets ill and he gets -18, and the second player remains healthy, and this probability 0.1, they both remain healthy. They just enjoy dancing and get 2.2. So now see what happens if the strategy of the player is to stay home. Even in this simple strategy, it's always to stay home, both players. 0.9, there will be no pandemics because we begin at the state when it's still not clear. So 0.9, the players will get 2-2. Let's talk about player 1. So player 1 will get 2. This probability, however, 0.1. There will be a pandemic, and since they both stay home, player 1 will get 0. So player 1's utility is 0.9 times 2 plus 0.1 times 0. So it's 1.8. That's the average, that's the expected value of the cost of those paths, which get realized under this probability choice. And of course, if I chose to do something, I would need to average some other things. Okay. I hope that's clear. That's a nice example of randomness. And now let us extend the game with imperfect information. Now, the game till now, every player knew exactly what the other person has done. Not only did they know the game, that's what we always assume, that's called complete information. So like in auctions, we usually don't know the game, we don't know the information, because we don't know how much that sold item cost them. In chess, we usually don't know the game. You assume that you just know that the player wants to win it, and that's it. And you know all the possible moves and so on. But in chess, we also, chess we have the complete information. Excuse me, a perfect information. We see what the other player has done till now. But it can be that we don't know what the other player has done. We need to act when we don't yet know what the other player has done. It can either simulate, as we will see, a normal game or strategic form game. We have two strategies taken simultaneously, or it can be that really I do something after the other player has acted, but I just don't know what the other player has done. Someone may be ambushing me somewhere. I don't know whether the other player is ambushing me. So my action is to go or not to go to whatever place. But the eventual utilities will definitely depend on what the other player has done. I don't know that. It can be both in a game with complete information, like in this chess when you don't see what the other player has done, which is called a Kriegspiel. When someone ambushes me, also I know that they want to bust me. But it can be also in a game with incomplete information. So it can be both incomplete information and that you don't know the actions of the other people. For example, in some sealed bid auctions, when you don't know the values of the other people, and also you don't know what exactly they have bid. But again, we are usually going to talk about complete information unless we say otherwise. Only in rare cases we can talk about imperfect information, and here we generalize the definition of to accommodate the imperfect information. So by the time you act, you don't know exactly what the other person has done. You need to define your strategy being oblivious to what the other person has done. Now, it can be even that you knew what the other person has done, but now the states merge and you now need to decide something without knowing. So it can be model not only lack of knowledge, it can model also lack of memory, memorylessness. Now, we model this by the strategy being forced to be not a function of the exact state where the play is, but a function of the information set. So you know only that you are in one of the states in the so-called information set. And you choose which of the 4 possible moves, for example, you take. Every state of the information set has to have exactly the same number of possible moves. But they'll have different meaning depending on the set, on the exact state, but you don't know that. when you act at least. Now the nature state, which is sometimes used for randomness, which is used for randomness, if you need randomness, has perfect information, because if you want just to emphasize, you don't need this option of having the nature being oblivious to the to how we got somewhere. Because if you want the nature to act in the same way in several of its states, we can just define in a model that the distributions are going to be the same in those states. It's only relevant in the states of a real player. So for any set of player's actions, Vi, we divide it in the mathematical sense so that it's a Vi is a disjoint union of non-empty sets. To set Ix, and the set Ix, I index it by the index set of I. So set I the index set of the index set of I indexes all the information sets of player I. For example, it can have 1, 2, 3, 3 information sets. It can have 300 nodes, but they divide it to 3 information sets. And we require that for every state in the same information set, the size of its children set, so the number of children is the same. So the number of nodes of the edges to the children is the same. And then the strategy is just not a function from your move states, not a function from Vi, but a function from the index sets. So the function from your possible information sets, and for every information set, the strategy gives some number, at least 1, at most a number of moves, at every node of the information sets. These nodes have the same number of moves. So he says that, okay, now I'm now taking move number 5. And then depending on the actual state, the fifth of the possible states usually moved is taken. And as I said that nature does not have imperfect information. It has only all this perfect information, perfectly granulated information sets, all of states 1. No confusion. Now with imperfect information, and also maybe a randomness also, we can define paths in the same way as we defined it before, and then the utility is the expected value if you have randomness of the path. Now, please notice that we define basically the perfect information means that each information set of a player is a singleton. So no player has ambiguity about what happens. And here is a very simple example. You also may see a similar example in the homework. So lion decides whether to ambush the zebra on her way to drink or not. Now if the lion decides to rest, then the zebra has to decide whether to go to drink or just to remain hidden where she is. And the same zebra has to decide if the lion decides to ambush. The zebra doesn't know that. Now if the lion decides to rest, and the zebra decides to hide, then of course the lion doesn't get anything, and the zebra doesn't get anything because the lion doesn't eat, and the zebra doesn't drink. Now, if the zebra has decided to drink while the lion rests, the lion still gets nothing, but the zebra gets 3 because she has drunk. She has got some water. Now, in the case of an ambush, the zebra has to decide what to do without knowing. The dot line encircles the information set, the only information set of the zebra. Now, zebra decides where to hide or to drink. Now, if the zebra decides to hide, then she gets 0, but the lion gets -1 because he's just not rested. He's gone, so he's gone to the ambush, so it was not a nice place. Now he's tired, so he's got -1. He has lost some energy for nothing. Now a zebra, however, can also decide to drink. Now in this case, of course, there's a high chance of the lion catching the zebra, and then the lion would get a lot, 20 for catching the zebra, and the zebra would lose. Probably she would lose her life, so she would lose -100. Okay, so you see, these models, we don't know how to act, because if the lion at the rest it's better for the zebra to go to drink, but if the lion ambushes, it's much better for the zebra to stay hid. Of course, in their life you have repetitions and so on. So the zebra has to sometimes go to drink, and the lion has to sometimes go to hunt. So in their life it's much more complicated, but let us just look at this example as is. And let us now give some interesting remarks about extensive game. Now, first of all, a strategy of a player must include also what to do at an unreachable state. Again, that under a given strategy, a player will never reach some state. Let us look for the example with the Caribbean crisis. If Khrushchev does not deploy the missiles, he will never have to decide what to do if he is shot by Kennedy, according to his model. But the strategy has to specify what Khrushchev will do at each of his action states. Now, why? Why do we define this like that? The rationale is simple. Well, first of all, it's indeed simple. Because then the strategy simply is a function which goes from all the move state of the player, and not only from the move states where the player can ever get with a positive probability. Now, we do that also for completeness of reasoning, since we can assume players make mistakes. Actually, we don't have to do it if you can never reach the state given the probability of the nature with the positive probability, because then it will be anyhow weighted out. But that's a delicate thing. So basically, it doesn't simply matter how you define it in this case. You always have to define strategy on all the nodes where the player plays. That's how turn to play. Regardless whether the player ever reached the node, simply if the node is reached with probability 0, then it does not matter. It does matter, however, in some models, what the player does on a node which they will never reach. Because the other player, for example, can take this into account as a possible threat and so on and so forth. Depends on how we analyze the game. So it's important to remember that the strategy has to define what the player does on any one of her VIs, or any one of her states, or generally speaking, information sets, if it's in a game with imperfect information. Another remark is again, we will need this when we get to extensive games, but now it's just something we need to know the basic notions. There is a notion of a subtree, of course, and a subtree rooted at a state defines a subgame starting at the state. Now we need to also note that for that to make sense, if the game has imperfect information, we only may have a subtree which splits no information sets. In particular, the game itself is always a subtree which splits no information set, and so is each leaf. Now, let us make a detour. We have a notion in non-cooperative game theory which is called succinct representation. And that is relevant for many cases when the space required to just store the game is too large. For example, if you just want to write every utility as a table, and you have n players with, let's say, k strategies each, the size of the table is k times k times k n times, so k to the power of n. Also times n, because we need to write n numbers, n utilities values for each player. Exponentially number of players. So in some cases we want to save space, and game does not really have a lot of information to really maintain a full general table. And sometimes just computation time for certain algorithms we may need to compute something about the game, say to compute a stable state or whatever, which we have not yet defined, but you can imagine we may want to compute stuff given a game. So sometimes we need to make things simpler and to save space. So to save space to time, not to make them simpler. Most of the space has space to time, or to just get insight. So to store a game in a way which utilizes the structure that the game may have. In that case, we may use these more elaborate representations we define here. Of course, this depends on the game and on the algorithms we want to run on the game. So, one of the succinct representations, one of the most famous, we are going to look at two options here. One of them is graphical game. So, it's when the player of an agent may depend only on a small subset of other agents. It's a subset, of course, theoretically, this subset can be all the agents, so it's a subcase of the general case, but it makes sense to talk about this only when you have a small subset on which the pair depends. So I have some bubble in the society. Usually what happens to you depends only on what happens to your immediate environment. Not always, but mostly, or let's say often. In this case, we can look at the graph, which tells who depends on whom. So two nodes are connected if and only they depend on one another. Of course, it can be non-symmetric dependence, so this can be in a directed graph. And you have a set of local matrices, one for each player. So a matrix determines for each vertex in this graph what are the utilities of this vertex depending on the strategies of the neighborhood and not on the whole graph. So the nodes represent the players, and the utility on the players depends only on the neighborhood of the player in the graph. So I mean on the adjacent nodes. So the formal definition is as follows. A local game on players n, with strategies SI, talking about abstract strategies, so it's a strategic normal form, is defined by a graph on the play which connects to players if and only if they influence one another. And the utility matrices for each player, capital U is the utility matrix of player U. Then where the utility of player I is the set of all the real matrices, which basically gives her utility for every setting of the strategies of the players in her neighborhood. Now, in this case, I kind of don't say so, probably it goes for an undirected graph, but it can also be a direct graph. It can be that I depend on the player, but the player does not depend on me. And then, of course, I'm looking on the players who influence me in this matrix. And the neighborhood is closed neighborhood in the sense that it's all the edges who are adjacent plus myself. Because my strategy also includes my utility, generally speaking. And the utility of a player for giving a strategy profile for the game is just the value in this matrix given only the slice of the strategy profile which refers to this closed neighborhood. So this of course saves a lot. If indeed at least most of the dependencies are local. So the locality is defined by the dependence, but that you can define and this graph, locality graph is sparse. That it does not have too many edges. Of course, the graph is not needed, it simply demonstrates who depends on who. The only thing we need is to know this matrix of the given player, and that's it. And let's look at a nice example. We have it's a poor example, but I think it's clear, it makes things clear. So I have four players and strategies are A or B for each one of them. Now the utilities of player 1 and 2 does not depend on the strategies of the other player, and the utilities of 3 and 4 also do not depend on the strategies of 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 only influence one another, and 3 and 4 only influence one another. Pretty much you can say that these are separate games. And it's a very simple game, of course. It's going to be a non-connected graph. This can be that the dependency graph does not have to be connected. Unlike the play graph of the extensive game, dependency graph can be disconnected. It's actually very nice if it's disconnected. It's probably not realistic, but it's nice. So the utilities of player 1 and 2 are defined by the matrix, which only takes as inputs their own actions, and the first number is what 1 gets, the second number is what 2 gets. Only look at this game. The utilities of player 3 and 4 are defined as follows. By the way, you can look at these games as a sub-game in an extensive game. Right? And because they don't depend on one another anyway. But now, if one acts before the other one, then the sub-game, only the guy who acts afterwards, and will be a sub-game, he may know what the first person did. So it may be a sub-game, but yeah. I think we would need to So it's not trivial how to model these subgames as subgames in extensive game model. It does not have to be trivial. It's possible to introduce a dummy node. Okay, whatever I said now, it's completely irrelevant to users. These are interesting if you want, please ask me. It's definitely not important. Let's go back to the example. I was just thinking how we can model subgames in this sense to subgames in the sense of extensive game, which is much more important for us, the second sense. But I've been like speaking unclearly about that, so not important. Let's go back to the example. The utilities of players 3 and 4 are defined as follows. So they only have their own matrix, so it only takes into account their actions, and the first number is the utility of 3, the second number is the utility of 4. And then effectively the game can be seen as two separate games, as I said. So the graph simply, the game can be modeled as a graph which connects 1, 2, and 3, 4. So there are 1, 2 are connected by an edge, and 3, 4. These are connected components of this graph. So there is absolutely no influence between those. And now, the local games matrices are basically derived from those matrices I've drawn. So the matrix of the first player is the matrix of the first numbers in A, I call it A1. The matrix of the second player, U2, is the matrix of the second numbers in A, I call it N2. The matrix of the third player is the matrix of the first numbers in B, and the matrix of the fourth player is the matrix of the second numbers in D. So, you see, in this modeling, we immediately start from this modeling as two small matrices, but imagine that we just looked at one matrix 4 and 4, and we imagine that we mixed it like that. It would not be like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it would be like 1, 3, 2, 4. So it could be not so clear that the game is actually decomposable in a way. So it's definitely an insight-giving representation in this case. And also finding Nash equilibrium would be simpler in the case of course, two separate matrices. We'll do it later. We have not even defined the Nash equilibrium yet, but I'm just saying so that you know that it's a nice thing. Another succinct game is Polymatrix game. Unlike the graphical game, which are generic, so every game can be looked at as a graphical game simply that if the graph is not sparse, it's not interesting. Polymatrix games are different so much. Not every game is a Polymatrix game so much. If the utility of a player, it may depend on any other player, but if it's the sum of what the player obtains from every one of the other players separately, so it can be basically as a decomposed pair of interactions, then we can write it as a Polymatrix game. So basically, a Polymatrix game on players N is a game when the utilities are defined by two-dimensional matrices for every two different players, and what the player I gets is the sum of the utility what she gets from her interactions with all the other players. So unlike in graphical games where we assume that the player does not interact with many other players, here there is no such assumption. But here the interactions are local. So how I interact with John is independent from how I interact with anyone else. While in graphical games, this may be small group of players who influence my utility, they could interact in any other way. So what I get from John can depend on what Jane does. Okay, so now let us talk about how can we convert. Again, that's not something we're going to do a lot in this course. Don't worry if you don't really like it. But try to understand the main ideas. We need to sometimes convert between one form, one representation, and the other one. So the normal form, the extensive form, and the graphical game, as I've said, are fully expressive. So we can always represent the game from in one of those forms, in any of those forms, and basically do it as follows. So we are now going to see some examples. But basically what we are doing is that given a normal form game, the extensive form game just needs imperfect information to represent simultaneity. That you have this simultaneity, that you don't know how the other person has acted. Given an extensive form game, you simply can, regardless how the game is complicated, you have some strategies. It can be a game with imperfect information, randomized, whatever. Eventually you have strategies and you can calculate the expected value for each strategy profile. So you can just write it for each one of those strategies. What is the expected value? You can just write it as a normal form game. You just forget the extra information which is encoded in the extensive form and look at it as a normal form game. And well, so of course, graphical game is a particular case of a general game, or let's say of a normal form game. But actually, the graphical game is also general because in the worst case, simply the graph is a complete graph. If everyone can influence everyone else, it's simply that the representation is not useful if the graph is complete or just not dense. But you can always represent the game as a graphical game. But maybe the degree of this graph, the degree is the largest degree of something that will be a very important parameter to estimate how convoluted the game is. Please remember that, as I said, the Polymatrix game is something else. That's a statement that the interactions between players are only pairwise. I mean that they are pairwise independent, and that's definitely something which not every game possesses. You will have such an example on the tutorial or on your homework. And now let's look at some examples of convergence. So given a normal game, let's look at matching pennies. That's a classical game. So both players have the same set of strategies. It's usually looked at as a normal game. So A and B. If the strategies match, the first player gets 1 and the second player gets 0. If strategies differ, the first player gets 0 and the second player gets 1. So the best action depends on what the other player does. The best response, what we talk about, is going to cycle. So if they say start here at AA, the best response for player 1 is going to be to go to 0, and the best response for player 2 is going to be to go for... The best response for player 1 is going to be to stay on A, because player 1 gets 1, and the best response for player 2 is going to be to change to B. So if they're going to move here. Here player 2 stays and player 1 will move. Here player 2 will want to move. Here player 1 will want to move, and that's how they circle. So you see, they have a circle with the they have a clockwise rotation. But forget it, how can we express this game as an extensive form game? We express it simply that player 1, let's say it moves first. It can be of course done symmetrically that player 2 moves first. Player 1 chooses A or B. Player 2 does not know what player 1 has done. It simply has to choose A or B. And then depending on what player 1 has done and what player 2 has done, they get the path. So if both players have chosen A, player 1 gets 1, player 2 gets 0. If both players have chosen B, the same. However, if player 1 has chosen A and B, and player 2, has chosen BA, my apologies. If player 1 has chosen A and player 2 B, so that's the realized path, then player 2 wins, and the same goes for player 1 choosing B and player 2 choosing A. And then you have an example how they should generally take any extensive game, move it to a normal. Let's look at an extensive game which has only 2 players, but can be done of course to any extensive game. Simply you encode the strategies in a matrix. Simply with 2 players, this is a 2-dimensional matrix, so it's simpler. So you encode the possible case strategies which tell how player 1 behaves in the tree, basically. As the row player, you encode the possible, say, L strategies as the column player, and you write the utilities down. That's how you move from extensive games to a normal game. And to wrap up what we've done, game theory is a fascinating topic of studying interaction using math. So we model psychological, social, economical, and other interactions, and then we mathematically analyze. Of course, we need to decide what we want to do, what we assume is a reasonable thing to do. So we need some input from sociology and from psychology, but then we can mathematically prove important laws, dependency theory, a strong tool with many implications and beautiful theory, and that's thriving. I definitely recommend to study that further and to go into research. It's based on what the players want on the utility theory, and we will start with non-cooperative game theory. In particular, we'll start with normal form games, or the same as saying standard form game, abstract out from the details of the strategy and all that, and then we will study the extensive form games, which have many additional properties. So the advantage is that they allow analyzing additional little details of interaction. Of course, the big disadvantage is that it's extremely hard to analyze them sometimes, especially in practice. And since we need to enter a lot of parameters, like how the interaction exactly is done, it's very sensitive to how we think the interaction is occurring. So both models are interesting. We first will study normal form games, and besides, of course, non-cooperative game theory, I hope you'll have time to study cooperative games. Okay, so please send me or ask me any questions by mail, in the comments of the YouTube video, or at the tutorial. See you tomorrow.